Today I'd like to introduce our speakers. The complete bio, however, for the speakers is in your forum program, so I will provide only brief introductions for each. Our first speaker was appointed by Governor Kasich last July as Ohio Superintendent of Public Instruction. Please welcome Stan Heffner. I'm covering his speech, that's the reason he's right. Our moderator this afternoon has worked on behalf of Ohio's children for many years. He is president and CEO for kidsohio.org. Please welcome Mark Reel. On behalf of the Columbus Metropolitan Club, here are our speakers, and I'll uncover your speech here someplace. There you go.
Well, thank you very much, Rich, and thank you, everybody, for coming today, especially when you found out who the speaker was. It really is an honor for me to be here with you today. You know, throughout my career, my entire career as a teacher, as a principal, I've been a superintendent. I have always worked throughout my entire career from one simple premise, and that is I really want to make sure that all kids have a chance to succeed. And I can tell from the goals of Columbus 2020, you know, where you want to add 150,000 net new jobs, increase personal per capita income by, or earnings by 30%, attract $8 billion in new capital investment, and become recognized as a national economic development leader. I can tell from those goals that you agree with me that the success of our community, our economy, and our state rests largely with a well-educated and well-prepared citizenry. And that includes especially our children. The students who will enter school this fall as sixth graders will become the graduates of 2020. And to be successful, they are going to need the knowledge and skills that are necessary to survive and thrive in the world they're going to inherit upon their graduation. And that means that they're going to need far more rigorous coursework that prepares them for their choice of college and careers. And for those who say, are they really the same, college and careers? The answer is yes, they do mean the same thing. You have a legal-sized sheet at your table just for your reference. This is produced by the Ohio Department of Jobs and Family Services, and it lists the top 50 jobs for Ohio's future. You'll notice from the list that there's a range of occupations on the chart, but they all have three things in common. Wages sufficient to support a family, increased likelihood that they're going to stay employed, and greater opportunities for advancement. Of the top 50 jobs, if you look at the column for the second from the right-hand side, it's the education requirement column. Of those top 50, if you count, 43 require some form of education after high school. The other 7 are going to require on-the-job training. Estimates will show us that 60% of Ohio's future jobs are going to require a form of post-secondary education, quite a reverse opposite of where Ohio was in the 1970s. So we know that a high school diploma is not sufficient, and it cannot be looked at as an exit for learning. Instead, it has to be seen as an admissions ticket that you earn for the next step that students take. So how are we doing in addressing these challenges? Today, I'm here to suggest to you that we're not doing near enough, and that despite the fact that we have teachers out there who are working their hearts out every day on behalf of our kids, but they're working in a system that lets them down and shortchanges our students. Now, why do I say this? Well, it's because the current system was designed in the late 1980s, when the measure of school effectiveness was based on the idea that high school students had to have at least a 9th grade level of education. So for some of you, that's where we got the 9th grade proficiency test. That test got upgraded in the mid-1990s with the current Ohio graduation test. However, the OGT itself is only an 8th or 9th grade level measure of minimum competence. And students on average only need to pass 37% of the items on that test to be considered proficient. I don't know about you, that's not much of a standard. So it's simply not enough to serve our students well in today's economy, and it certainly won't prepare them with the knowledge and skills they're going to need to be successful in their futures. So in addition, if you think about it, not only do we have the K-12 system, public education, but this system was designed separately from the higher ed system and from the preschool system that sends children to us in the first place. So we have a systems design problem. I want to fix it. Our recent education reforms are moving Ohio schools from an antiquated system of minimum competency to one that really prepares students for success in their choice of going on to college or getting a good career. We're also moving the system to seamless passage of students from the preschool programs they're in through their K-12 experience and then on to their choices of post-secondary training or education, whatever they want to do for the jobs and careers that they want to attain. So let me just start by beginning with this journey of youngsters through their learning. And we begin in preschool. With our reforms, Ohio recently won a $70 million Race to the Top grant to elevate the quality of its various preschool programs. So over the next 4 years, we're going to use these funds to do the following purposes. One, we will define and improve readiness standards for preschool providers. So whether you operate a Head Start program, a public preschool program, you're a private provider, all of those folks will know exactly what the outcomes are for their programs for children to exit them and be deemed to be ready to begin successful entry into kindergarten. Secondly, we'll address and publicly report the results of each provider so that early childhood educators, schools, and the public will have a much better idea of which approaches are working and what learning gaps need to be filled. And third, we want to improve the training for all early childhood educators so they actually have the tools that are going to be needed to prepare these youngest learners. And we must do these things because we know that kids who enter kindergarten who are behind are more likely to stay behind, and those who do may never graduate. The country on a whole has a 76% graduation rate, which means that apparently it's good enough for 1 out of 4 kids to be thrown away. I don't share that view, and so we need to take the steps. And we need to know that being ready to learn in kindergarten also means that you have to be ready to read. A recent report by the Annie A. Casey Foundation found that if children cannot read well by the end of 3rd grade, they become 4 times more likely to be these dropouts that I'm talking about. And that's why this bipartisan legislation that Governor Kasich signed into law recently strengthens our 3rd grade reading guarantee. In the primary grades, students learn to read so that later on, they can read to learn. So this improved program is designed to make sure that students in kindergarten through 3rd grade are on track to becoming good readers. So starting this school year, the Guarantee Program, and I believe, give a little credit, a little commercial here to Kids Ohio. Details of that can be found at your place settings, and I'm sure if you need more copies, Mark will be happy to get those for you. But let me just summarize what's in there. The program really requires, first of all, that all students who come to kindergarten will take a readiness assessment. We need to know where they are so we know where to begin with them. Students who stay in kindergarten, go on through kindergarten, grades 1 through 3, will annually receive reading diagnostics. We want to make sure that the kids are on track. The students who are found behind must receive special attention that matches their learning needs, whatever that form that may take. In addition, parents of these children must be informed of the child's reading progress, and they must participate in tailored efforts to strengthen their child's reading ability. And finally, the results of these diagnostics are going to become publicly reported for the first time so that communities can see whether or not they're really getting the right kind of investment, return on their educational investment, and make sure that they can see what kind of progress the schools are making. Under this program, some students may not move out of the 3rd grade until they're proficient at reading. Folks may think that's not fair to those kids. But it is cruel if we only set them up for failure by allowing them to move on when they're not ready and then remain frustrated and thus more likely to drop out of school. These students will continue instead to receive the extra help that they're going to need until they are able to read at their grade level and move along with their classmates. And then finally, as our students progress through the grades and think about their futures, this new budget legislation does something else. It creates the answer to a very exciting question is, why are we learning this? So the new law requires that the curriculum embed connections to careers so that students who can see exactly what they learn really applies to the real world around them. These career connections will be age appropriate. So for example, younger children who are at risk, younger children who do reading can think about the world of work just by what was the occupation of the characters in the book or the settings of the books. For older students, the connections can make them aware of career opportunities that are available and what might be expected by employers in those fields so that they can understand that there's a reason why I have to know this mathematics why this science is important. So in short, these career connections will help make learning more relevant and give more meaning to students for their education. Now, all these are good initiatives, but there really needs to be more done for our children. And more initiatives and more improvements to our schools are on the way. By the 2014-2015 school year, new learning standards take effect. And the minimum competency standards, the competencies that I mentioned just a moment ago, these 8th and 9th grade things, are going to be replaced by newer and higher standards for English, math, science, and social studies that are designed to lift students from the bare minimums to a degree of readiness for their choice, successful choice of college and careers. There will be fewer of these standards for teachers to have to cover so that they'll have the time to go in much greater depth, making sure that students really get to understand the content. And it's not just the what I'm learning, but why I'm learning it. These standards are designed to make sure that our students will learn what they need and learn what they need to do to compete and succeed against anyone, anywhere, and any time in the world. New standards will transform the role of the teacher as a dispenser of knowledge to a facilitator of learning. They will change the role of students as passive listeners to active learners who use technology to pursue knowledge, project-based learning, and develop such skills as creativity, innovation, problem-solving, collaboration, all which are skills they're going to need if they want to succeed after high school. And the good news is that recent polling data shows that the more our teachers are learning about the new standards, the more they like them. And that's true of many of our Franklin County schools, many of whom are not waiting for 2 more years to get started with this. They're doing it now. Now, these standards are important because we're going to measure them. And we're going to measure higher expectations with a new system of assessments that use multiple measures of growth throughout a student's entire school career. The results are going to be used from these tests, and we'll use to let students show what they know and to unleash the power of technology that they use now for their social and entertainment purposes to really motivate learning. Could you imagine somebody who spends 12 hours a day on Game Boy doing 12 hours a day in algebra? They will yield real-time feedback on student performance and inform teachers' decision-making for learning. And these are the real purposes of what tests are supposed to be about. We'll do these things because we need to upgrade an antiquated education system that was designed before that we even had an internet that changed almost every aspect of everyone's lives. Schools, in the meantime, did not keep up while society modernized. So we have a lot to do. But I think we can do it. I think we must do it, and I know that together we will do it. Now, change is not easy. And the results from these new standards and these new tests in a couple of years are likely going to be far lower than what schools are currently experiencing. But they can grow if we keep our focus on 2 things. First, we move away from just believing that all kids can learn, and we take steps to ensure that all students will learn. And the second thing we do is that we put the needs of students ahead of the desires of adults or the wants of maintaining outdated institutions. We're seeing this commitment in a strong bipartisan Cleveland Schools plan. And again, I think there's a document that's at your chair that kind of gives a summary, the 10 facts, again from Kids Ohio. The Cleveland Schools plan does not fear change. It also does not fear competition from community schools, and it does not fear the use of technology to transform teaching and learning. Instead, the Cleveland plan embraces these things. So as more schools upgrade their systems to meet the challenges of the future, we can all see improvement when we focus less on report card results and more on kids learning and achieving. The other things will take care of themselves. So learning from each other means that our education systems also have to do a better job of working together, those disjointed higher ed K-12 preschool systems. So all of these elements among them really need to be aligned, and we all need to stop working independently of one another and start working in harmony. That's why I'm happy to announce today that the Board of Regents will be moving their offices from Rhodes Tower to the Department of Education building. They should be in by November 5th. So that our staffs can work together. And the areas that we have already chosen, the Chancellor is just a terrific person, and he likewise puts students above institutions. The areas we're going to study to begin with is putting together higher standards and greater coordination between how we prepare teachers and how we license them. We're going to take steps to prevent the need for 41% of our high school graduates last year going to colleges in Ohio, public colleges in Ohio, and needing remediation in English or mathematics for things they should have learned when they were in high school. This cost them $147 million last year out of their Pell Grants and their Stafford loans, and that's entirely unacceptable for taxpayers who should be supporting a system that actually gets results and doesn't let our kids down. And we're going to ensure that our job training programs meet the needs of our employers and the future workplace by making sure that the adult ed programs and our career tech programs are not across town from one another, but they're actually going to be in the same building, same room, working together. Now, I know that we're requesting an awful lot from our schools right now. These are tough economic times. But I believe Ohio's educators are among the best in the nation. And they have risen to the challenge before. I've watched it, and I'm confident they can do it again. They just need a better system that helps them provide every opportunity for our students to learn and succeed. And I am pledged today to tell you that that success is our top priority. And so it is. I'll end my comments, and then I guess Mark's going to grill me here. And so it is in the daily doing of this work that I hope that all of us in this room can be as inspired as I am by the words of the late Ron Edmonds, who is the founder of the Effective Schools movement. And he said to us, we already know everything we need to know to make sure that all children can learn. The only question remaining before us now is how we feel about the fact that we haven't so far. Thanks for listening.
Great. Thank you very much, Stan, and thank you for acquainting people with the literature that's at your tables, which was prepared by our staff. We want to get into the issues you raised about kids learning and achieving, but I think before we do, I think there are a number of people in the audience who stopped me on the way in who would really like to know about the front page article that many of us read today about investigations into the Columbus and Toledo schools, about the changes in attendance records. And I think people would like to know what's going on with that, please.
Well, what I can tell you is under general guiding principles, Ohio citizens who make investments in their schools need to be able to rely on the fact that the data they receive from their schools on how well they're progressing and how well they're doing on the education return on investment, that information is honest, it's timely, and it's accurate. I will accept no standard less than that. When we have evidence or when we have reason to believe that there may be violations of those guidances, we have a responsibility under Ohio law to take a look. In one instance, we have a joint investigation going on with the Auditor of State's office, and this was at the request of the Superintendent of the Columbus schools. With Toledo, there was their superintendent, for whatever reason, came forward and indicated that some of the practices that he was reading about in the press might be going on in his district and has come forward. So I can't talk in depth about investigations that are undergoing, but I will tell you that there is at least another investigation that we've been doing for about a year. I'll leave that for the 6 o'clock news. But there's at least a third district that is involved, potentially others. We want to have as good a data as our systems allow. And frankly, the state's system over the years hasn't been that great. But now that we have increased technologies, we have a greater ability to go out and verify the data. So you know that old Russian thing about trust but verify? That's where we are. The system has to rely on the honesty and the integrity of the people who are providing the information, because the department has no way of going out and doing that in every school. So it is when we have reasons to believe that there are anomalies that can't be explained, then that's where we begin the investigation. That doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is crooked or that somebody is bad. It could just be somebody misunderstood what the instructions were. So we continue also to work on making sure we're clear about how coding happens in the system and how judgments get made. So that's the whole process. But I will tell you that where we have instances where we believe, as you'll hear about on the 6 o'clock news, where improper conduct occurred, I will be asking our Office of Professional Conduct to launch investigations along with the Attorney General's office if I find there's evidence of fraud. So we have criminal and civil activities going on at the same time. Those folks have no business in our public schools.
Could you tell us exactly who is conducting the investigation?
Well, the Auditor of State's office for Columbus is taking the lead. And we're in the process of discussing with the auditor what to do about the Toledo situation. On the third one, the Department of Education did that investigation solely. And then based upon what happens with others, we'll just need to kind of see how, basically what are the allegations maybe imply, so we know who the players need to be. And just so you know, among the tools that I have available, one of the report cards that was in question, we've invalidated, and we have downgraded the district. I also have the power to fine, and I have the power to withhold up to 20% of state aid. So depending upon what we need to do, what the severity is, we'll take the appropriate steps. However, I also don't want to do anything that hurts the opportunities for children because of the bad behavior of adults.
One final question, we'll move on to the others. Can you give us a sense of the timing?
I wish I could, and I'm not trying to weasel out of anything, but Auditor of State office is taking point on one, so they really will control that calendar. We're trying to be a good partner. The one that I'm thinking of that we did alone was a full year investigation. So it's going to depend on what the nature of the problem may be, how deep it is, and what resources we have available.
Well, thank you, and there'll be a question and answer period, so if you want to pursue this in greater depth, certainly you can. Switching back to your top priority of kids learning and achieving, what can you summarize for us? You mentioned these new learning standards. What is your hope for the next year, the next 2 years? What do you hope to see happen differently in schools than is going on today?
Well, I actually think if I was a teacher, if I was starting out again, I'd be very excited about these. Starting with federal no-child law, where we had to create content standards. The very first time the state came up with these, we wrote them in 2000. And at the time, everybody remember that old definition of a camel as a horse drawn by committee? Everybody who sat around the table said, we need to have them teach this. Oh, the kids need to know this. The kids need to know that. Well, I'll give you an example. In 8th grade social studies, we have 54, I believe it is, benchmarks that kids need to know in 8th grade social studies. The only problem is they're in school 36 weeks. So teachers were literally running like crazy because God forbid the one thing that they didn't cover will be on the test. And so with pacing guides and other things that they had to deal with, they basically just kind of flew through everything like a stone skipping on the water. You just didn't get a chance to get very wet. That's being replaced we've cut the standards in half. We are encouraging our teachers to bundle them so you don't have to teach them separately. They all are really integrated. We believe that utilizing concepts called inquiry-based learning, project-based learning, means that the teacher sets up a much bigger picture so that the learning has context. Students would be engaged in many more problem-solving activities, group work, collaboration, use of the internet and other technologies to go out and find answers. Mm-hmm. So it's not read 20 pages in the book and do the chapters at the end of or the questions at the end of the chapter. Now this is really putting learning in the hands of teachers, or of kids. I'll give you a quick example, and it's a sad one. In 1984, John Goodlad, who was at the time the dean of the UCLA Graduate School of Education, did a big national study of what typical schooling looked like in the United States. I want to give you just 2 quick findings that are just bother me, because I don't think a lot's changed. But see if this sounds familiar to you. Number one, when they went into the schools that they found that were the typical schools in the U.S., they measured how much the teachers talked in relationship to the kids. Teachers out-talked all of their kids combined by a ratio of 3 to 1. So what you did is the definition of a student is someone who sits in a hard plastic chair all day and watches old people work. Because schooling really was, you could raise your hand, you could do some things, but if you wanted to get by doing nothing and not be held accountable for anything, you knew how to play the game. You sat quietly, you didn't cause any trouble, but you daydreamed while they talked on and on and on. Second thing is, when they asked the kids to list their favorite courses, number 1 was phys ed. I know I've come to surprise everybody. No, actually, number 1 was art. Number 2 was phys ed. Number 3 is music. Number 4 was English. Not sure how that got in there. fifth was home economics, sixth was woodshop. So if you stop and think about it, what do they all have in common? Kids got to do stuff. They actually got to be engaged. And the role of the teacher was more of a coach or a facilitator as opposed to a dispenser of things, because they would come down and work with each one of the kids and give them that kind of feedback. So when we get to back to your question about what should the new standards do, these are great opportunities now for teachers to put the bigger context, the bigger questions of meaning out there so that students can get engaged in work to show how each of the pieces and parts might fit into the whole, make more sense of what this is about. And then, like I say, unleash the power of the internet and other activities. When kids are, they're texting, they're YouTubing, I'm getting old, I'm forgetting. But all the applications that they put on their phones, they're downloading apps there's over 17,000 apps to choose from these days. So kids are just engaged in all of these things for social entertainment purposes. Wouldn't it be amazing if we would just stop banning the use of these items in schools and start making them available for kids to use for learning? And we'll soon learn that it's more than Google Print and it's more than Wikipedia. Because we teach those kinds of skills. And I just think it's long overdue. So the standards are going to promote this kind of activity. And I promise the next question will be shorter.
Well, one thing that's changed since some of the people in this room were in school is that there are a lot more choices.
There's a lot more history.
Right. There's also 100,000 Ohio students. You're the superintendent of all students in public schools, so there's over 100,000 students in public charter schools. There's over 20,000 students who use publicly funded vouchers to attend private schools. How do you think about this new world of school choice, and how do we make sure that children in a district school or a charter school or using a private school voucher get the kind of education you're talking about?
I think, Mark, the best way to do this is to stop looking at prescribing inputs and start describing outcomes. We shouldn't care what pathway a parent chooses for the child to go, because not all kids learn the same way. So, and what we've discovered too is when you give Americans choice, they exercise it. That's what the country's about. So it shouldn't matter whether you're in a traditional setting, you're in a charter school, you're in an online school, or you're whatever. As long as we describe what the outcomes are, what the expectations are, and have honest, integrous data that really helps us determine how well the schools are doing in providing the educational opportunities for kids to make those. Otherwise, if they want to have the opportunity and freedom to choose different pathways to get there, they ought to be able to do that. So we quit teaching or treating kids like they're widgets and really give the choice and the opportunity. So, and then I would argue too that we have to do this on a quality basis and call people on it, because see, I'm not worried about school choice, I'm worried about choice schools. So it shouldn't matter where they go as long as it's a good opportunity and that we have integrous data and reports behind it. And when the charter school legislation got introduced, I was superintendent in Madison up in Lake County, about 40 miles due east of downtown Cleveland, right on the lake. And when they asked me what I thought about charter schools, I said, bring them on. Because I will do one of two things. They're either going to do something in their experiments that is working better than I'm doing, so I'm going to take it, and I'm going to steal it, and I'm going to improve on it, and I'm just going to make myself better. The second thing is, if they're not doing it, I'm going to call them for what they are. That's competition. So I'm not afraid of having the competition. I welcome it, because I'm either going to demonstrate that I'm doing a better job than they are, or I'm going to learn what they've done, and I'm going to incorporate it, and I'm going to get better myself. That was what the whole promise of this was all about in the first place. And so again, there are some charter schools that have no business being open, and they ought to be closed. So it's not just because you're a community school you get a free pass. But likewise, they're not the enemy. Ignorance is the enemy. So it's just a question of whether or not the ones who are working well can be promoted to continue on in their efforts, and our kids benefit from whichever route works best for them.
Stan, one of the things that the Metropolitan Club members like to know is a little bit about you as a person. And I know
I'm adorable.
One of the things that
they didn't agree, Mark.
It's all on television. There's one of the things that many of us here know is that you made a very significant financial sacrifice to take the position that you're now in. that you were primed, ready to leave Columbus, to go to Texas with a national organization, and things changed in your life.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your commitment to education.
Well, I guess I'll start at birth. I'm born and raised in South Dakota. It is a state that, and I think the Plains states generally have this in common, but there's a very strong commitment to young people and to education, and so that was just ingrained in me as I was growing up. After leaving the state and doing my doctoral work in Idaho and interning in Washington, D.C., I came to Ohio. I wasn't sure, I didn't know I was going to do that in 1985, and I thought I'd stick around for about a year or two. But I have really grown to love the state, obviously, and 23 years of superintendency after, later, I came to the Department of Education to do the real work about making teaching and learning meaningful and not just some set of hoops that we ask teachers to jump through. So I helped to design the new content standards. I helped to design the score reports that change how parents are told about how well their kids are doing. We're in the process now through a federal waiver to look at different forms of accountability and provide reports that actually have meaning to parents. So I'm just really driven by service. And I was prepared at one point to do something else. And I don't know, I had talked myself into it. And I believe that there is a fate and there is a purpose. The governor would say that the Lord moved in a mysterious way on me. Because at the very last moment, the state board found itself without a candidate. And the question became whether it was going to reopen the search or, what could we do? And I was like, the moving truck was basically 2 days from my house. And I had the chance to have an epiphany. And it's the best thing I've ever done. My heart is in Ohio, and my heart is with this work. But more importantly, my heart is with our kids. And that just trumped any opportunities I had in the private sector.
Great. This is the time when the Metropolitan Club opens the microphones for questions, not speeches, but questions. And if you would identify yourself and ask a question. And while you're doing that, I just want to point out that the one-pager you have does have some facts on the back about the state of Ohio and about the Columbus, Cincinnati, and Cleveland school systems, which may be of interest to people. David?
Hi, Stan. Job well done. David Chesbrough, President of COSI. I'm going to throw a few stats out because there's a point to what I'm going to ask you here.
Okay.
First of all, I really applaud your work on taking a systemic approach. Take a place like COSI that has 1 million learning engagements a year. We deal with 400,000 children and teachers in any one given year. 240,000 of our youngest kids below the age of 6 go through experiences at COSI. And so when you start to look at an educational asset like that, and that's just one out of the many that we have in the state, and yet what we're seeing is a constant decline in the school use of facilities and resources like us, the Art Museum, and others. My 40th year in education is this year, and as I look at the research, more and more of it looks like there's a learning ecosystem we need to recognize, not just schools. In fact, one study has actually done a calculation that the amount of time, if you look at lifelong learning, in a formal classroom is 5% of your life. So the question to you is, how do we bridge that gap? How do we take the resources, such as, for example, a longitudinal study was that 8th graders, looking at math, science, and attitude, the best predictor of them going on to study science and math in colleges and going into careers wasn't the math score, wasn't the science score, it was the attitude, which comes back to your point about home ec, phys ed. How do we bridge that gap? Because right now, it's not evident to those of us who have these incredible learning resources, unique learning resources, that can benefit these kids, but don't seem to have a place within the system and are getting pushed out more and more out of the system in terms of the availability to teachers.
Largely, of course, we're really talking about the benefit of field trips. I think, in part. I mean, there should be opportunities to make certain assignments, or kids could make visits as part of a larger unit, and just do that whenever it's appropriate, but have purpose and meaning for doing so. For those who like to engage in field trips where the kids go there and they're going to do something specific in wherever they visit in the community, Number one, they're a little disruptive because they take more time than a regular class period. That always turns people off. I'm always amazed that people think the best time to take field trips, of course, is in May after the state tests are over. The best opportunity to really make the connections with the community, which is along with our career connections, is when the value of that interaction has a direct relationship with the content that the students are learning. So in part, we have to look at knowing full well what are the offerings and what's the schedule of those offerings during the year, so the teachers can really take a look at that and see how they can integrate it. I also don't know that we have to take every kid to an institution if the institution has an ability to put itself on the net and so it can bring itself to the kids, either that or making the school visits themselves. But the biggest thing is we have to get past this economic downturn, and as the schools slowly recover, we can start putting those resources and things beyond just bare survival.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Superintendent Heffner, thank you for being here. Greg Brown with the Graham family of schools, 4 charter schools here in Columbus, 2 high schools, the Graham School and the Charles School, and a middle school, Graham Expeditionary Middle, and now a new elementary school opening. All of them are project-based, experiential, expeditionary schools. So I love what you're saying, of course. And I'm wondering, though, how we can more uniformly and intentionally tie research to what it is that we are learning works in schools, all schools, and to be more intentional about infusing that into the classroom. For one, we're moving to the Common Core standards. With that, what we call interim assessments, which are helping us to, on a more frequent basis, determine whether or not students are learning what we intended for them to learn.
Right.
With you and the regents moving into the same building, well, them moving into yours, how can we fire up research to look at that and then to look at larger issues that can help us move forward with accumulative knowledge?
So a couple of things. We have a different Race to the Top grant we received a couple of years ago. In that grant, $400 million over 4 years, most of it being shared with local districts. But we did retain money to create a special office of educational research. And it's 50% with us and 50% with the Board of Regents. So we are finally getting organized to do exactly what you've talked about. When we can identify the schools that are high performers, we need to be able to go into those schools, observe what they're doing. In the effective schools methodology, they also went into ineffective schools. So if they observed the same things in high performers and low performers, obviously that wasn't the difference. But they've identified, back in the late 70s, early 80s, we identified 5 strong correlates about what makes schools effective. Ohio built on that with a program they call the Schools of Promise. Same thing. We have a lot of observations there, but the state has not been good, and I'll just be honest about it. I don't think the state has been very good about translating and reporting that to school folks or to the general public. It may not work for you, but what we're saying is in most instances, engaging in these kinds of activities generally tends to get better results. So we are going to step that up with this new Office of Educational Research, which we just opened probably, I'm thinking 3 or 4 months ago. Matt Cohen, who's a longtime employee of our department, will be the director of that. So we're going to engage in exactly what you're saying, because if there's proven stuff out there, I think people need to know about it.
Well, let us all know how we can help.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next, please. No, next one.
Hi, Stan. I'm Lynn Heffner, Director of the Ohio Academy of Science. I want to compliment the move of the Board of Regents into the same building. At least that'll help a little bit on the communication there. I'm really pleased to see that. I'm generally pleased with the Common Core standards, especially the nonfiction writing portion for the upper grade levels, and we try to do nonfiction in science. But I have a Google alert set. I have a Google alert set.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I have a Google alert set for Common Core, and I'm beginning to see some articles across the nation, some pushback there.
Yeah.
Is there any serious pushback here in Ohio, and if so, where's it coming from?
Well, Lynn, first of all, I want you to know that we are a driving force there are 26 states that are looking at science standards. We are a driving force in that. and you're going to get more yet of what you wanted the last time around, I think, in this next round. So I think that's a good thing. In terms of the Common Core standards in pushback in Ohio, I'm not hearing it. We are getting, there is some in western states where it's a states' rights concept. They're not opposed to the standards, they just don't know how much they really want to give up total control over their own state activities. But one of the reasons we did that was so we could get higher standards, get everybody to agree to that. We could do it more cost effectively. And we could finally, for the first time, actually measure apples to apples across the country, so we had honest measurements. So we thought that those are good things. At least in Ohio, that still seems to be the prevailing sentiment.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. Jordan Davis from the Columbus Partnership, and I have a two-part question.
I have a 5-part answer.
Okay, great. All right, so the business community is gaining a lot of momentum, and you're right when you say that this community cares about how the education and our workforce development is going to increase our prosperity in our community. And so I ask you, and I know you have aspirations about what the dream education system would look like. In that dream world, how is the business community engaged and leveraged to make that a reality, like your aspiration? And then 2, when we think about being globally competitive, how are we going to increase students understanding and speaking and being fluent in other languages, especially Chinese and these things that we talk about?
Thank you. Let me take your second question first. We have foreign language academic content standards that we're in the process of revising. I rejected the last draft because it continues to focus on the idea that foreign language starts in high school. Foreign language should start in kindergarten or beforehand. All the research shows that kids are more capable of becoming bilingual, trilingual, quadlingual when they're in their younger years, and they can make the connections for the various words for like glass, so in each of the languages they would know how to make that conversion. That happens all the time. It's definitely happening in our Head Start programs, for example, with our English language learners. So these are mostly our Hispanic speakers who come into Head Start programs. Well, we're putting that bilingual program into place. They're learning English, but at the same time, they're going to have 2 languages compared to a lot of English-speaking kids who are only going to have the 1. So waiting until high school doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So one of the very first things we need to do is engage, and start to really rethink about where foreign language is best taught. On the other aspect with regard to businesses, I think businesses should always be encouraged to be involved. I want to encourage the involvement of business. I don't want to ever dump on business like somehow it's your responsibility only. That would be a mistake. Well, I think one of the greatest things that we can do, and I want to applaud the governor, because the Career Connections is his idea. And I can't think of the name of it. Nationwide and others are going to be sponsoring a day where they're going to host students from Columbus schools. So the kids who might drive by that big building and never know what's in there, but we're curious, can get a chance to see what it would like to work in a place like that, how you have to dress, how you have to behave, and then the kind of things that you need to know. If you would like to have that kind of job and have that kind of life, what's it really mean? Because for too many kids, there's a detachment from that. All they really know about business is typically is the store they go in to buy things from. But they don't know about manufacturing. They don't know about financial services. They don't know that much about banking and all the other aspects. So where we can get businesses to help us by hosting short-term internships or student visits, and really having the right kind of employee interaction with those kids who will take the time to really get to know who they are, talk about their aspirations and dreams, and then match what the business needs are to what those kids want to become. That's where I think the real connections get made. That's what the governor's talking about. And kids then finally get a grasp about why school's important. And you can really help us in that regard.
Hello, my name is John McKnight, and very happy to hear everything that you've said. I think it all sounds very positive. There's an element that's missing, though, that frustrates me, and it has for a long, long time. I work in the collision repair industry, which is a segment of what's thought of as the skilled trades segment of society. And most skilled trades businesses don't require formal post-high school education for their employees. A big part of the reason why is because it's not offered. There's very little effective post-high school education that does anything from any of the skilled trades. There are some specialized schools out there. They're few and far between, and their programs are weak. It's every bit as complicated, if not more so, to repair the damaged unibody structure on a new Acura, or to troubleshoot the electrical system, that's damaged on one of today's modern hybrid vehicles, as it is to write computer code.
Right.
There are multiple, high school and post-high school programs and degrees in computer sciences and all those related fields. There's barely any in collision repair or in any of the skilled trades. And I think that if there were programs that were offered, I think, and if you integrated them into the high school level, don't wait until college to start.
Right.
Take high school programs, whether they're work study programs, vocational programs, and tie them to postgraduate or post-high school, I should say, programs. I think you might be able to capture a percentage of that 25%, what you referred to, which I didn't care for, as the throwaway percentage of the kids.
It was intended for us to never think of them as that.
Sure. I think that if you developed an educational program that spoke to those kids, if you offered programs that taught weights and measures as it pertains to collision repair, chemistry as it pertains to paintwork, geometry as it pertains to construction, and again, tie that to post-high school programs, if you spoke to some students, I think that you could really improve some of the numbers. Why don't they pay more attention to that? Why doesn't society acknowledge that as every bit as important as a lot of the things that are out there that you do have to get degrees for?
Well, as one who's owned several cars in his lifetime, I need guys like you.
Everybody does.
No, and it's true. So a couple of things come to mind. One is when schools try to do separate programs like automotive trades, it's an expensive program, and typically they also then become the first victims of budget cuts.
Yeah.
That's too bad. Second point I want to make is that we have 49 joint vocational school districts in Ohio. We have a number of, Columbus is not one because it's its own district, it's called a comprehensive district. But I can tell you, at least among the JVS districts, we have far more capacity in the districts than we are using. So one of the things I want to do with regions, you were talking about the training programs. Why would we want adult ed programs separate from the career tech programs when we've got the facilities there? And if the cost is an issue, if we start actually contributing and we're jointly training adults and students and everybody else in the specific applications of the skills, that should work. In addition to that, I don't understand why we then have to have yet a separate track under the WIA programs to have training activities in that regard. So it just seems like it would make some sense, and I know Rich Fredericks out of the governor's office is trying now to bring a confluence of all of those things together so you're not duplicating and triplicating programs. That increases the likelihood. The second thing that I really want to, and I want to brag on this because Ohio's leading the nation. If you're in automotive trades, is there any math in automotive trades?
There's math required in the process of performing the work, yes.
Sure, and science?
Mm-hmm.
So why are we teaching kids all of these concepts separately when they don't have any kind of an anchoring in this work, when in fact, if we identify the academic content that's a part of the job training pieces, we should be able to offer dual credits for kids as they learn this stuff. As we do that, we ground this much more in the real world, and the learning makes a lot more sense for them.
If the math and science is taught in a traditional manner, it's not going to speak to some of those children. And myself included. School didn't speak to me at all. Traditional school did not. It wasn't because I wasn't smart. It wasn't presented to me in the right way. If there would have been a means for me to tie school to something I wanted to do in life and make sense of it and learn in that fashion, it would help. I could sit here and talk all day, so I'll excuse myself, but
Great.
But I think that's something important that needs to be addressed more.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Brad Scott, former member of Superintendent's Advisory Committee in Reynoldsburg, current NAACP Executive Committee co-chair. My question is, special ed is a $60 billion industry in the country, and the stats here in Ohio are not too good as far as African Americans are concerned. Is there anything specifically that you're doing to make sure, I know that maybe you can't make teachers pick their classes in service, but is there anything that can be done to make sure that teachers are a little bit more culturally sensitive?
That's an excellent question, and I could go on all afternoon about what I've observed in some districts, but I'll save you that. I think it does make sense. It is not just that a student might have a learning deficiency, but those who come from different cultures, who don't understand some kinds of mores and norms that might be in the neighborhoods that they live in, when they come to strange surroundings and are expected to immediately just become whatever those people are, that doesn't happen. People have identities. I grew up in a state that has Indian reservations. We talk about self-determination in South Dakota. So it is one thing to know your content, and it is another to know the deficiency of the child, but it's a third thing to know who the child is as a person.
Exactly.
And so where we can get that kind of cultural, actually where I think it would best start is from within the community itself, where populations in the community make the board aware of the sensitivity in the neighborhoods and with those children, so that the schools can take that seriously and provide the kind of assistance, utilizing resources such as yourself to actually talk more about what it is that these kids are like and what their culture is, and how best to address their learning needs. So
Right.
but I do tend to agree with you. If you look at the world from your own lens and to the exclusion of other people, you can talk all you want, you don't really make a difference.
Right. Well, thank you. And one more question.
Actually, I'm being given the sign, but because television's involved here.
Okay.
But thank you very much for your question. And the superintendent and I are stick around afterwards, so if you have more questions, we're happy to deal with it one-on-one. But thank you very much. Rich?
Encouraging to have people with such passion and enthusiasm involved in education. Thank you, Stan. I want to encourage you to sign up for next week. Bootstrap job reform, also an important topic, and sign up for the party on August 29th. As Mark said, we've got coffee and cookies out in the lobby. We can talk some more. Finally, thank you, Stan. Thank you, Mark. And thank you all for attending. Good afternoon.